The millionaire old man returned with his son. What they offered the poor single mom shocked her. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The hallway light above them buzzed, uncertain, and then steadied, as if it too had decided to stay for whatever this was. Claire held the door with one hand the way a person clutches a life jacket, ready to let go, ready to hold on, unsure which would keep her afloat. The older man drew in a breath that trembled on the way out, like a note played on an instrument that had survived a fire. "It's you," Claire said before she could stop herself. The words weren't a welcome or a question. They were recognition, putting its hand on the shoulder of the moment to keep it from falling over. "From the pharmacy." The old man nodded. In the thin light, his face showed all its maps, fine lines tracing years of weather, a slackness at the corners of his mouth that illness sometimes brings, a careful dignity that looked newly stitched. He lifted one hand as if to offer it, then let it hover, palm open, halfway between apology and gratitude. I didn't know how else to find you," he said. "But my son..." He turned slightly, and the taller man stepped forward into the slice of doorway light. "My son did." "My name is Richard Whitmore," the younger man said evenly, as if the hallway were a boardroom that didn't realize what furniture it held. "And this is my father, Charles." The last name landed between them like a dropped coin that doesn't bounce. Claire didn't flinch at the weight of it exactly. She had no space left for awe tonight, but she felt how the air adjusted around it, the way rooms change when a known name enters. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, then stopped. Titles made distance, and she needed the opposite. "Richard." She tried the syllables as if she were checking whether a bridge held. "And Charles." The old man's eyes brightened at the sound of his name in her mouth. Sometimes being called as yourself is as much a gift as any object. Charles cleared his throat. The sound was small and human, and it pulled the moment down to ground level. "You bought my medicine," he said simply. He didn't pad it with adjectives or apologies. The truth wore only its shirt. "I had no one there. I should have brought enough, of course I should have, but I..." His voice went thin and he paused, embarrassed by the body that keeps its own clocks. He steadied himself. "You gave me $8. 8. He repeated as if the number itself had a pulse. "And you did it in front of people who looked away. I can't let that become just a memory that melts." Claire swallowed. $8 could be a planet, depending on where you stood. She glanced over her shoulder instinctively, mother as compass, then back at the men. "You didn't have to come," she said, though what she meant was you didn't have to make me this visible. "A note would have..." "No," Charles interrupted gently, and in that one word there was an entire refusal of the world's easier solutions. "A note would get lost in a drawer, and gratitude deserves a door." He made a soft, almost embarrassed smile at his own sentence. "I insisted." He lifted the small bag he carried, not the pharmacy's white plastic, but a heavier paper with strings for handles, and clutched it to his chest as if it might argue with him. "But my son insisted more." Richard received the cue like a baton passed between runners. He didn't lean on the Whitmore name, he didn't need to. Its echo did that work without him. "You did something for my father that has nothing to do with money," he said, and the cadence of his voice slowed, as if he wanted the words to choose sturdy chairs before sitting. "He called me after he took his medicine. He told me about your hand on the counter and the way you didn't make a ceremony of it." Richard's eyes lifted to the thin seam of doorway between them. He said it felt like dignity, and I realized how long it had been since someone gave him that without first asking for ours. Claire tightened her grip on the door because the compliment had nowhere else to land. Praise can bruise when it hits unprepared skin. "I didn't do it for..." She stopped herself. She hadn't done it for anything. She had done it because a clock inside her had chimed and told her that time was up for the kind of person who doesn't look. "He needed it," she finished, soft but firm. That was enough. The tip of Charles's shoe edged into the light. A detail, but one that made him feel less like a portrait and more like a man who could catch cold. "May I say something that might not come out right?" he asked, and when Claire nodded, he added, "You reminded me of my late wife." She had a way of deciding quickly, as if hesitation were a luxury other people could afford. When our son was small, she used to say, "If the right thing is within reach, take it before the price goes up." His mouth twitched at his own memory. "Tonight, Miss Claire." "Just Claire," she said, because Lace had no place here. "Claire," he repeated, and the syllables softened him. "Tonight you reached." A breath slipped out of her that she didn't know she'd been holding since the pharmacy. The hallway's thin light, the paper bag's soft crackle, the motor below, all of it arranged itself into a pattern that, while not comforting, was at least coherent. "Why the car?" she asked. She meant why the spectacle, why the proof, but she let the simpler question carry the rest. "Because my father frightened me on the phone," Richard said plainly. "And because we did not want to waste time finding you. There are 1,000 apartments within a mile that look like this to men who only ever look from the outside." He said it without pride. If anything, it sounded like a confession. "But my father remembered the pharmacy's security camera." We asked. "We watched you step into the night. We followed." He did not make the word predatory. He made it procedural. "If that unsettles you, I accept it. We will leave if you ask us to, but we will still find a way to do what we came to do." Claire let the truth wash over her. She weighed invasion and intention on a scale she had learned to carry. "What is it you came to do?" she asked. She kept her voice low. It felt wrong to wake sleeping children and right to demand clarity. Charles lifted the bag an inch. "To say thank you," he said, "and to put bread in a place where kindness took its place." The sentence startled her with its accuracy. He looked at her not with pity, but with comprehension, and that was far more dangerous. Pity can be refused, comprehension less so. "We brought a few things. I know the hour is unseemly for deliveries, but hunger does not keep office hours." She almost laughed, not because the line was funny, but because that particular strain of humor, weathered, utterly practical, sounded like something her mother might have said. The laugh didn't fully arrive, but it lifted the corner of her resistance. "You can't," she began, and then heard the softness of feet behind her. Daniel had shifted again, the small thud of a heel against couch fabric, the whispered negotiation of dream with waking. She pivoted half an inch, mother eyes verifying that sleep still held. It did. She turned back. "You can't come in," she finished, not apologizing for the boundary even as she wished it didn't have to exist. "But you can hand me that." Richard didn't move first. He glanced at his father, a choreography of deference that looked well practiced. Charles took a careful step closer, enough to bridge the gap while leaving the border intact, and held out the bag through the narrow space. Claire reached forward. Their fingers didn't touch, but something passed between them anyway. The recognition of a transaction that wasn't a trade. The bag was heavier than she expected. Cans, probably. Bread. Maybe milk cradled in something cold. She wasn't going to inventory it here in front of them because need likes privacy, but the weight itself was a document. It said we saw. It said we meant it. "Thank you," she said. The words were the same ones he had tried to offer her at the pharmacy. They sounded different now, not larger, not smaller, just truer somehow, freed from the humiliation that often chases them. Richard cleared his throat. "There's more," he said. The reflex in her shoulders returned. "Of course there is. With men like you, there is always more." And he saw it. "Not money in an envelope," he added quickly, not defensive, simply precise. "Not charity, an invitation, but that conversation can wait for daylight if you prefer." He glanced toward the couch then, and the look he gave Daniel was not appraising, not predatory, not even paternal. It was respectful, the way one looks at a crown owned by a country that isn't yours. Claire set the bag on the floor beside her foot, and use the move to buy time. The linoleum was scuffed, the baseboard chipped. The place told the truth, and so did her face when she looked back up. "Why me?" she asked, not as protest, but as a calibration. "You don't know me." Charles smiled with the economy of a man who has learned that smiles must be saved for when they matter. "We know the part of you that counts under pressure," he said. "That's more than most introductions offer." He shifted his weight delicately, and Claire noticed the faint tremor in his left hand, the kind that makes stares long. "I've shaken hands with men who look like my son," he added, "and they gave me less certainty than you gave me with $8. Silence pooled and then found its level. Somewhere deep in the building, a pipe knocked 3 times as if to keep time. Claire could feel the next turn of the story arriving. It wasn't the loud kind. It was the kind that slips a key into your palm and waits for you to notice the door you hadn't realized was locked. "Come back at daylight," she said at last, shaping the terms of her own safety. "After 8. Not earlier. My son." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. All mothers are multilingual. The grammar of protection needs no explanation. "After 8, Richard repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a contract already signed. He took a breath he hadn't meant to take and let it out as something almost like relief. "We will leave you to your night." Charles inclined his head again, slower this time, as if bowing to a queen in pajamas. Then he did something that rearranged the angle of the moment. He placed his hand lightly against the doorframe, not to steady himself, but as if blessing the boundary that had kept them honest. "Thank you, Claire," he said. "Not for the bag, not for the plan, for the pharmacy, for the 8, for seeing him." She nodded because any other gesture would have spilled. "Good night," she managed. The men stepped back in practiced tandem, and she eased the door closed to its latch. The deadbolt slid home with a sound that felt less like shutting out and more like tucking in. She stood with her forehead against the wood, eyes closed, the bag's handle pressing a half-moon into her ankle. Below, the car's engine stirred, then softened, then faded as if the block itself were exhaling. Claire carried the bag to the kitchen and set it on the counter. She did not open it. Not yet. The ceremony of opening would belong to the morning and to the small hands that would clap at the sight of bread like it was a parade. She returned to the couch, to the warm dent where Daniel had left the shape of himself, and gathered him closer, watching the door as if it were a horizon. On a bench in another part of the city, a middle-aged narrator, and yes, some of us were born to watch and to tell, would say, "Some reunions do not require embraces. Some only require a door and the right names on either side. Tonight had given them that much. Tomorrow would ask for more. Morning in the city is never the same sound twice. Some days it's delivery trucks grumbling awake. Others it's the impatient hiss of buses. Sometimes the shout of someone who thinks their urgency can bend time. For Claire, morning usually meant the stubborn rattle of the old radiator and the thin cry of her son calling for cereal. But that morning, this morning, she woke first. Her eyes opened to a silence that was unfamiliar, as if the apartment itself were holding its breath. The memory of the knock at the door still pressed against her skin. For a moment, she lay very still, her hand spread across her son's back where he had curled himself against her during the night. Daniel's small body rose and fell in perfect rhythm, oblivious to the weight his mother carried in her chest. Claire sat up slowly, her gaze sliding to the kitchen counter. The bag. Heavy, quiet, waiting. It looked out of place like a guest that had stayed too long in the night. She hesitated before approaching it, as if the paper handles might speak when she touched them. But she needed to know. She lifted the bag onto the table, its weight shifting with the sound of cans, bottles, something solid wrapped in paper. Daniel stirred, his hair mussed, eyes blinking open. "Mommy?" His voice was small, dry from sleep. "I'm here," Claire said, forcing lightness into her tone. She reached into the bag and pulled out the first item, A loaf of bread, thick and golden, the kind from a bakery where people write the prices on chalkboards instead of stickers. Daniel's eyes widened as if he had seen a toy. "Can I have some?" he asked. Claire's throat tightened. She nodded quickly, slicing it with the dull kitchen knife, handing him a piece like it was communion. He bit into it with both hands, and the sound of crust cracking felt like music. Item by item, she unpacked the bag. Milk, still cold. Eggs, a jar of honey, fresh fruit, apples so red they almost looked painted. A packet of butter, wrapped in foil like a secret. And then at the bottom, an envelope. White, unmarked, heavy in a way paper isn't supposed to be heavy. She froze. Her fingers brushed the corner but didn't pull it out. She already knew. Not charity, Richard had said. Not money in an envelope. Yet here it was, taunting her with its quiet presence. She closed the bag again and set it aside. Daniel didn't notice. He was chewing bread, humming to himself, the morning light painting his cheek. Claire leaned against the counter, her eyes on the window. Outside, the city was stretching itself awake. Yellow cabs lined the curb, a dog barked impatiently, a woman in a red coat hurried past holding coffee. Everything normal. Except not. Because at 8 o'clock her world was supposed to tilt again. She bathed Daniel, dressed him in his cleanest shirt, brushed his hair back though it refused to stay. He chattered about school, about the boy who had traded him a marble for a sticker, about a teacher who always smelled like chalk. Claire smiled, nodding, folding his words into her heart like fragile laundry. She didn't mention the knock. She didn't mention the men. Some truths arrive only when they are ready. By the time the clock's tired hands reached 7:50, Claire's stomach was a knot. She stood by the window, watching for the car. The old glass pane blurred the street, but she could see enough. The edge of the curb, the stretch of asphalt, the moving shadows of people beginning their day. Daniel tugged her sleeve. "Are we going somewhere, Mommy?" She swallowed. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe someone is coming here." His eyes widened. Children always know when something unusual hovers in the air. He leaned against her leg, peering through the window with exaggerated seriousness as if his gaze could summon or repel what was coming. At exactly 8 o'clock, the car appeared. Black again, quiet, sliding into the curb like it belonged to the street. Daniel gasped. "That's a fancy car," he whispered, his face pressed against the glass. Claire's pulse quickened. She smoothed her hair back, though she had no time for real preparation. Life doesn't wait for your best version. It comes when it chooses. She lifted Daniel into her arms, kissed his forehead and whispered, "Whatever happens, stay close to me." 3 knocks on the door. Firm, respectful, measured. She opened it to find Richard standing there, the old man just behind him, his hand resting lightly on a cane this time. Richard carried no bag today, only a leather folder tucked under his arm. His suit was crisp, but not arrogant. His eyes met hers, steady. "Good morning, Claire," he said. His voice was gentler than the night before, but it still carried the weight of someone used to rooms falling silent when he entered. "May we come in?" Claire hesitated, her hand tightening on the frame. Behind her, Daniel peeked out from behind her hip, his small fingers gripping her dress. Charles leaned slightly forward, his smile warm. "Only for a few minutes, if you'll allow it," he added softly. Claire's chest tightened. She thought of the bread, of the milk, of the envelope still sitting unopened. She thought of the way Charles had looked at her last night, not as a beggar or a benefactor, but as a human being meeting another at equal height. She stepped aside. "Come in," she said. The men entered quietly, their presence filling the small apartment with a gravity that made even the furniture seem to straighten. Daniel stared at them with wide eyes, clutching the crust of bread he had refused to let go of. Richard glanced around the apartment, not in judgment but in awareness, as if mapping every corner to understand the life lived here. He set the folder on the table beside the unopened envelope. His eyes lingered on it for a moment, then returned to Claire. "I owe you an explanation," he began. And with those words, the morning turned into something larger than itself. "I owe you an explanation," Richard said again, not because Claire hadn't heard him, but because saying it twice built a small platform for what needed to stand on it. He unfastened the leather folder with a sound like a quiet decision. Charles lowered himself into the chair with the patience of someone who had learned to negotiate with his own bones. Daniel hovered half behind his mother, half in front of her, as children do, brave and hidden at once. "Start with the truth," Claire said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. Truth was a currency she understood, even when she could not afford much else. Richard nodded. "The truth," he agreed. "Last night, after my father took the medication you made possible, he called me. He told me what happened. I looked at my calendar and realized that if I were the kind of man I claimed to be, I could not wait until morning to meet the kind of woman my father had just described." "I didn't do anything extraordinary," Claire said. "I gave a stranger $8. And I've watched men whose names build skylines fail to do even that," Richard replied, not unkindly. "Extraordinary isn't always what is difficult. It's what is rare." He slid a single sheet from the folder and kept it face down, a promise withheld for a moment longer. "I run Whitmore Industries," he continued. "We build things, real estate, logistics, community programs that I will not pretend absolve the rest. We are large enough that my name gets blamed when we are cruel and credited when we are kind. I don't have control of every decision, but I have control of enough." Claire said nothing. The refrigerator hummed as if to remind them that electricity was still doing its job. Daniel's small hand found her fingers and wove through them, a knot tied without looking. "My father told me that at the pharmacy no one met his eyes," Richard said. "Not the pharmacist, not the woman who pretended to compare shampoos, not the man in the suit checking his watch like it was a mirror. But you did. You saw him, and seeing is a form of power we undervalue." He gestured gently toward Daniel. "You are teaching that power to your son already. I would like you to bring it to my company." The sentence altered the room the way weather changes pressure. Windows adjust, wood notices. Claire swallowed. "Bring seeing?" she asked, unsure whether to laugh at the abstraction or brace for the specifics. "Bring what you did into our halls," Richard said. "We have an internal crisis line that field managers ignore when it's inconvenient. We have a tenant relations desk that knows how to say policy, but not how to say person. We have security teams trained to remove problems but not to recognize needs. Somewhere between all those corridors, there is the space for a unit that catches the human thing before it becomes the legal thing." He let the thought sit in the air for a moment, then added, "I want you to pilot it." Claire blinked. "Pilot what exactly?" "A small team," Richard said. "To begin with, 3 people, then expand if you prove me right. Their mandate. When something breaks between us and the lives we touch, they go. They listen first. They act second. They close loops, not files. They report to me." He allowed himself a thin smile. "Which is, I admit, a selfish clause. I don't want this to drown in bureaucracy." She looked at the envelope on the table as if it might answer for him. "This sounds like something you would give to someone with a degree, or a resume longer than a grocery list." "Degrees are tools," Charles murmured from the chair. "Useful until they are used as doors that lock from the inside." Richard nodded. "You clean those towers," he said, glancing toward the window as if he could see past the bricks to the skyline. "You know the names on the plaques and the names on the mops. You understand what humiliation sounds like when it tries not to be heard. I can hire 10 people who know how to write a memo about empathy. I can't easily find someone who won't need a memo to practice it." Claire felt heat rise in her face. Praise sits differently when you haven't eaten enough of it. It can make you dizzy. "There are people who would resent this," she said slowly. "People who studied for years and would say I took something that should be theirs." "Then take this and make it more," Richard answered. "Hire them. Lead them. Ask them to teach you the parts only they know. Teach them the part you already live. I'm not replacing one kind of knowledge with another. I'm trying to build a bridge that has both steel and rope. Daniel, having deemed the grown-ups too still for danger, wandered to the table and stood on tiptoe to see inside the bag from last night. Apples shone like coins he was allowed to spend. He touched one with reverence and looked for permission. Claire nodded. He took it, bit, and winced at the cold, then grinned around it. "What would it pay?" Claire asked, and the dignity in the question was its own kind of spine. Richard did not flinch. "Enough that rent isn't a cliff every month," he said. "Enough that your son's jacket zipper is replaced before winter, not after. Enough that savings becomes a word with a number next to it. In figures, $72,000 to start, health coverage from day one, transit stipend, and the authority to expense groceries for field interventions. Within reason." He held her gaze. "And childcare support on days the city doesn't cooperate with schedules." Numbers rearranged the furniture in her mind. Rent, food, school supplies. Suddenly they were lines she could draw instead of storms she could predict but not avoid. "I don't even know what a unit like that does at 9 on a Monday," she said, a shaky smile escaping. "Or at 2 in the morning." "Neither do I," Richard said. "That's why I want you to help define it. I'm not asking you to wear a cape. I'm asking you to wear a badge that means this problem will not be shoved to the end of the day." "Who protects me?" Claire asked softly. "When the problem is bigger than a listening ear? When it's a man who thinks the rules are for other people? That's why you report to me," he said, "and why you will never deploy alone. You will have authority, backing, and the right to say no if a situation exceeds what kindness can fix." Charles adjusted his cane, an old conductor signaling a new tempo. "He will keep his word," he said simply. "I raised him to think contracts are only as good as the man who signs them." Richard slid the face-down page toward Claire and turned it over. A simple job description, clean lines, no jargon's camouflage. Under position, pilot lead, human outcomes unit. Under reports to, CEO. Under purpose, see people early, solve without harm, close with dignity. There were bullet points, too many, as always, but the top 3 were clear enough to read like vows. Claire traced the edge of the paper with one finger, not touching ink. "Why me?" she asked again, but this time it wasn't doubt. It was calibration, an engineer checking load-bearing walls. "Why take a chance on someone whose last job title is cleaner?" "Because the last person who looked me in the face and told me what I needed to hear, not what my position demanded to be told, was a woman on our maintenance staff," Richard said. "She told me the new lobby design would make people feel watched instead of welcomed. She was right. We changed it. It's the only time that year I can say our company did something purely because it was kinder." He glanced at Charles. "My father taught me that the map of a city is useless if you never walk it. You walked it last night, into a pharmacy where dignity was on clearance. I want to put that walk on payroll." She laughed then, a small, astonished sound that belonged to no one but herself. "You're good with sentences," she said. "I'm better with signatures," he answered, and then immediately softened the bravado with a self-aware tilt of his mouth. "But you should not say yes because I'm persuasive. You should say yes because when you wake at 3 a.m., it will still feel like a decision that respects you." The envelope on the table had become a little lighthouse. Even with its light off, everyone knew where it was. Claire finally lifted it. Inside were 2 things: a simple key card with her name printed in clean type, and a transit pass with a balance already loaded. No cash, no check, no bait, tools. She exhaled, the knot in her chest loosening a notch. "I don't want to be anyone's project," she said. The words came out more quickly than she planned, as if they had been waiting near the door hoping to catch a ride. "You won't be," Richard said. "Projects end. We are building something that, if it works, will be embarrassing to other companies for years. If it doesn't work, you will still leave with a record that says you tried to make a machine remember it has a heart." Silence moved through the room like a slow tide. Outside, a bus sighed to a stop. and then muttered away. Daniel finished his apple down to the star where seeds held themselves in a neat geometry. "Mom," he said around a last bite, "you can have mine tomorrow." It was an offering big enough to break anyone. Claire put a hand on Daniel's hair, then looked back at the two men. "I need to pick him up from school at 3, she said. "Practical, immediate. I can't miss it, not the first day of anything." "Then your first day begins after," Richard said. "Or tomorrow, or next Monday. You call the hour. We will build the meeting around it." "And if I fail?" she asked. Not because she believed failure inevitable, but because humility had taught her the value of naming it out loud. "Then we will have failed trying to do the right thing," Charles said. "I've failed doing the wrong things and the right things both. The bill from the first is always higher." Claire closed her eyes for 3 breaths and found, beneath fear and astonishment and the rattle of habit, a quiet place where choices could be simple. When she opened them, the apartment had not grown bigger, but it no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a room at the top of a ladder someone had finally steadied. "I won't say yes for the bread," she said, "or the apples, or the envelope. I'll say yes because of the sentence on this paper. See people early, solve without harm, close with dignity. If you mean that, I can mean yes." Richard's shoulders eased in a way even his suit could not hide. "I mean it," he said. "Then I'll try," Claire replied. "I'll try hard." "Trying hard," Charles said, pushing himself carefully to his feet, "is how the world got every good thing it has." The offer, which had begun as a sound in a hallway, became a structure in her life. And as the men stood to leave, the job description on the table looked less like a document and more like a doorway, just wide enough for 3 people to walk through side by side, if they remembered to look at who was already standing on the other side. On Monday, the building looked like a verdict: glass that reached into weather, steel that wore the morning like a medal. People moved in ribbons through the lobby, heels on marble, badges kissing turnstiles with soft beeps, phones raised like a second spine. Claire stood just inside the revolving door with Daniel's hand tucked in hers, because Richard had insisted on working around school drop-off and pickup, and because the first thing she wanted the city to see was that she did not arrive alone in her life. Security glanced up, then down to the temporary badge in the guard's hand. The man behind the podium wore the tired dignity of those who say good morning 100 times, and hear it back 50. His nameplate read, Hernandez. He gave Claire a quick professional smile, the kind that fits in a pocket, and said, "Welcome." He'd said it to 1,000 suits. He had probably never said it to a woman who had scrubbed a building like this at midnight. Claire returned the smile and meant it more than most mornings deserved. Richard emerged from the elevator with a timing that felt like choreography. No entourage, just pace. He knelt to Daniel's height and said, "I promised your mother she could call her own hours. Your schedule calls the tune." It was the sort of sentence that could be a line. It only worked because he attached it to the next thing. "We have a cafeteria with pancakes on Fridays. I'm lobbying for Thursdays too." Daniel regarded him with the solemnity of small kings, then nodded once. The treaty stood. Upstairs, the floor they stepped onto smelled faintly of new carpet and old confidence. Frosted glass announced departments like countries on a map: legal, operations, community impact. Richard led Claire past each border and stopped at a small suite with blank walls and a window that framed the city like a painting no one had finished yet. A temporary sign sat on a desk: Human Outcomes Unit. Beneath it, 3 empty chairs. Space made for a team that did not quite exist. "You're not late," Richard said, because power loves to say it. "You're early to something." He placed a notebook on the table, plain, linen cover, no logo, then stepped back from the room as if to acknowledge it belonged to someone else already. "I'll get out of your way. Walk the building, breathe it. I'll send you one message in 30 minutes. If you want to handle it, you will. If not, I will. Either way, thanks for letting me try this idea in public." When he left, the room felt larger. Claire ran a hand along the desk edge. Wood told the truth even when people didn't. She set her bag down, then walked the floor alone. She passed legal, where conversations were shaped like locks. Operations, where emails were stacked like girders. Community impact, where yesterday's glossy poster still leaned on an easel from an event that had fed more cameras than families. She didn't knock. She just looked. Seeing first, acting later. Back in the lobby, she found her first lesson waiting without introduction. A janitor in a gray uniform knelt on one knee, rolling a bucket forward to a spill cones encircled. He was older, 50s maybe, with wrists that told of tendinitis and years of lifting other people's carelessness. A young manager in a navy suit stood over him, voice low but sharpened for cutting. "You can't leave wet footprint trails through here," he said. "It's a hazard, and it looks sloppy." The janitor nodded, not because he agreed, but because paychecks teach politeness. He squeezed the mop again, the motion a small prayer to gravity. Claire approached. She didn't carry a title on her face, and maybe that helped. "Do you have enough cones?" she asked the janitor, not the manager. The man hesitated, then shook his head. "2 more would push the path wider," she said, "and buy you time to dry it right." She turned to the manager. "And if you post a real sign at the door that says wet floor, please use north entrance, you'll cut the traffic in half for 10 minutes. Looks less sloppy if you make the detour look like design." The manager blinked, the way people do when the solution is inexpensive and therefore disarming. "Who are you?" he asked, not hostile, just startled. "Pilot lead, human outcomes," she said, and watched his eyes do the math. He gestured vaguely toward her clothes, toward her absence of polish. She held his gaze until he veered away from that thought, embarrassed by himself in front of his own shoes. 2 cones. 1 sign, she repeated. "You'll be on time for your meeting, and he won't hurt his back wringing speed out of water." It took 90 seconds to fix. A guard fetched cones. The manager printed a sign and taped it where it became instruction, not apology. The janitor exhaled a little. "Thank you," he said, and she heard the way gratitude traveled down a long hallway of dignity before it reached the mouth. "I'm Miles." "Claire," she said. "We're on the same floor now." Upstairs again, her phone chimed. Richard's message. Tenant line flagged a call from Building 27. Mother, newborn, heat out on floor 9. Manager logged it as working on it yesterday. "You want it?" She could feel the way working on it tried to mean not my problem without saying so. She texted back, "I'll go. Need a driver and a tech who can fix heat." The car that took her wasn't the black one from the night. It was a practical sedan with a dashboard that squeaked on potholes. The tech in the passenger seat introduced himself as Priya, short for Priyank, eyes bright behind safety glasses pushed up like a headband. "We could have queued this for afternoon," he said, scanning a tablet, "but babies don't queue." Claire liked him immediately. Building 27 wore fatigue the way some buildings wear ivy. The heat in the lobby muttered, then sighed off. Somewhere above, pipes did the bone creak of old infrastructure. On the 9th floor, a woman in leggings and a faded sweatshirt opened a door to them, hair tucked into a messy bun that said sleep and survival had quarreled all night. A newborn sound floated from the couch. Thin, intermittent, protested. "I'm Claire," she said. "This is Priya. We're here to see the heat and anything else." The woman's eyes filled with something that wasn't exactly tears. You can't cry when your whole body is busy being relief. "I called," she said. "I thought—" She didn't finish the sentence because "no one was coming" is a phrase you don't say if it can be replaced by "someone came." Priya beelined for the radiator, knelt and listened with his tools. Claire noticed the small things. Bottles washed and lined like soldiers. Blankets folded into stacks like strategy. A pot on the stove holding warm water as a heater of last resort. She thought of last night. She thought of milk measured in hope. "Can I make you tea?" the woman asked, habit of hospitality stronger than exhaustion. "You can sit," Claire replied gently. And tell me what you told the line yesterday and the part you didn't say, because people don't like to bother people they think are busy. She pulled her notebook from her bag, found a pen that worked, and became less someone from a company and more what the room needed. A witness with wiring to the panel that controlled decisions. The story was simple. Heat flickered Saturday, died Sunday. Newborn named Amaya arrived home Monday to a cold that made breath into steam. The building manager had logged the complaint as an open ticket. A contractor had said, tomorrow. Tomorrow had brought wind. Wind had brought the kind of cold that calls neighbors to check on each other. No one from the building had called at all. Priya rose. Bad zone valve, he said. Stuck half open. Old as the Knicks' last ring. He grinned, sheepish in a way that made jokes into care. I can jump it for now, replace it by evening. He turned to Claire. We'll need the super to unlock the riser. He's not answering. Call me when a key is a person, Claire said, dialing the number she'd been given for when gates won't open. It rang twice before a voice dripping with perfunctory arrived. Santos. This is Claire with Whitmore Human Outcomes. I need you at 27 9th floor, she said. Newborn, heat out. Your zone valve's older than my patient's. A pause. I logged that, Santos said, defending himself from the accusation no one had made yet. I see the log, she replied. I'm after the unlock. 15 minutes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't soften it either. Authority, she discovered, was a tone available to anyone who decided to stop asking permission to use it. He came in 12, smelling of cigarettes and overwork. He looked at Claire the way people look at a kind of woman they haven't had to answer to before. She looked back like a mirror. He unlocked what needed unlocking. Priya coaxed the groaning valve into cooperation until a replacement could win the argument. The radiator sputtered, then belched, then breathed. Warmth climbed like a creature testing the stairs. The baby's cry shifted key. The mother exhaled a whole paragraph. Claire cleaned the stove's pot, not because it was her job, but because jobs that keep people human are everyone's job in a room like this. She texted Richard, heat up, replacement today. Manager didn't call neighbor. Recommend training plus escalation map that respects newborns. I'll write it. He replied with one character. It looked small. It meant a budget. On their way out, the mother touched Claire's sleeve. What is it you do? She asked. We show up early, Claire said. And we leave a number that answers. She scribbled 2 lines on a sticky note and slid it under the magnet that held a baby photo on the fridge. If someone tells you tomorrow when the room says today, call me. Outside, the wind had decided to be kind for an hour. Priya tucked his tools into their places and said, I didn't know this unit existed. It didn't, Claire said. Now it does. She looked up at the building's windows, so many squared eyes. We'll have to make it believe in itself. Back at the tower, afternoon had become the kind of light that makes glass pretend it is water. In the lobby, Miles was gone. A younger janitor had clocked in, earbuds in, shoulders tight. A woman in a pencil skirt scolded the security line for moving at the speed of humans. Claire stepped aside and let her hurry past, then found the mailroom where a clerk was arguing with a courier over a package's missing signature. Who signs for the things no one wants to own? She asked the clerk quietly when the courier left. The woman blinked, surprised by the question and the relief of being seen. Me, she said, half laughing, half confessing. And then it bites me. Let's design a glove, Claire said. The clerk's smile arrived like a small fire in winter. When she reached the human outcomes room again, Richard was waiting in the doorway, neither looming nor absent. He had the look men get when they're happy they guessed right and scared of how much they don't know. Well, he asked. A baby is breathing warm air, Claire said. A janitor didn't hurt his back. A manager learned a sign can be grace. A super came faster than his habit, and I owe you a training that fits on one page. And you? He asked. She looked at her hands, at the city outside, at the chair with 2 empty chairs beside it. I have a place to put the part of me that refuses to walk past people, she said, "and I have to pick up my son by 3. Go," he said. "We'll adjust the afternoon around the thing that matters more." In the elevator, strangers studied their phones. Claire studied their faces the way cartographers study coastlines, looking for the places where storms leave their evidence. On the ground floor, she passed Hernandez again. "How was your first day?" he asked, as if he'd been keeping score. "We stopped a few small leaks," she answered. "We'll try a roof tomorrow." He nodded the way men nod when they've been fixing things with their hands long enough to know where real repairs start. "Welcome," he said again, and this time the word found her name tag and stayed there like a pin. Outside, the city had fewer edges than it had when she walked in. Or maybe she had found a way to hold them without bleeding. She checked the time, shouldered her bag, and began the walk toward the school where Daniel would spill paint on paper and call it sky. Behind her, floors of glass reflected a woman who looked like the same person she had been yesterday. The difference was a small one. She now had a door to knock on from the inside. By evening, the city had changed its costume. Daylight peeled off the buildings and folded itself into pockets along the river. Office lights clicked on in grids like neighborhoods on a map, each square a private story in progress. Claire returned to Building 27 with Priya to see the new valve seated properly, the heat steady now, not because hope said so, but because metal did. The super nodded at them with the embarrassed respect of someone who has learned a better order of urgency, and the mother waved from the doorway, with a baby asleep on her chest in the universal position of truce. On the ride back, Claire texted Richard the one-page training she had promised. 3 headings, 3 sentences each, no word longer than the problem it tried to solve. See early. Answer with a time you can keep, not a phrase that postpones shame. Solve without harm. Use the least forceful tool first. Ask who was in the room that the policy forgot. Close with dignity. Return with the solution in daylight. Let the person sign the last line of the story. He texted back. Print it. Frame it. Hang it where excuses used to be. At home, bread became dinner again, but this time it did not stand alone. Heat rose from a pan where eggs set and hissed. Daniel jumped at the sound, then laughed, and in that laugh Claire heard a future in which memory would not always taste like scarcity. She thought briefly of the envelope still lying in the drawer. She had left the key card on the counter like a lighthouse. She had hidden the envelope as if it remembered another century. Maybe she would never open it. Maybe some things were best left as proof that she had been offered more than she planned to take. A soft knock changed the temperature of the room. Not the firm timing of last night, not the procedural rhythm of this morning. This was a neighbor's knock. Claire wiped her hands and opened the door to find Miles, the janitor from the lobby, holding a small cardboard box and looking awkward in the way kindness does when it isn't sure of etiquette. "I'm off," he said, "and I passed by a bakery that makes the good kind. I figured your kid might like." He lifted the box. Inside, 2 small cupcakes sat like moons, one with blue sprinkles, one plain. "My daughters are grown," he added, a shrug of decades. "I miss having a reason to buy 2. Claire blinked and then smiled, not politely, but like something had extended a hand across a river and been met halfway. "Come in," she offered reflexively. He shook his head, habit of boundaries that keep people safe, and said, "Maybe another time." He turned to go, then paused. "If that sign idea works, I'll tell the night crew it was yours." "It's ours," she said. "Things work better when that's true." When Daniel slept, face smeared with blue sugar, a small crime of joy, Claire washed plates and let water run over her wrists until the day loosened its grip. She sat at the table, opened her notebook, and wrote 3 lines for herself. Not for any wall. "We will not be the last to say yes. We will leave lights on for those who come after. We will remember that $8 can be a hinge." She closed the book and looked at the door as if it might answer. It did not. It had done enough lately. Her phone buzzed once more. A new message thread, unnamed. A photograph filled the screen. Charles on a bench by the water, scarf wrapped, cheeks pinked by cold. The caption, sent from Richard's number, read, "He insisted on his own first day back. Doctor cleared him for short walks. He asked me to tell you the medicine is working, but what worked first was being seen." There was another line, less composed. "Thank you for giving me back my father in a city that tries to rent everything by the hour." Claire stared at the photo until it felt like a postcard from a future she hadn't known to request. In the background, a gull winged past. Charles's expression held that wry helplessness of men who discover late that vulnerability is not a debt, but an inheritance you pass down by naming it. She typed back, "Tell him I'll bring him a better scarf when our unit has a logo." Then a second text before she could talk herself out of it. "Tell him to sit on benches often. Some of us are listening." Weeks passed in the way good work makes them pass. Fast in the hours, slow in the accrual of meaning. The human outcomes room filled. A former tenant organizer named Brianna, who could de-escalate with her eyebrows. A retired EMT named Gallo, who carried stories in his hands and never told them as trophies. A part-time law student named Marco, whose patience made policy feel like a tool instead of a trap. The 3 chairs were not enough. Richard authorized 6, then 8. The unit became the kind of rumor that turns into a phone number people save. They were not perfect. They missed things. They arrived late sometimes. They said sorry and meant it. But patterns started to change. Managers called earlier. Security walked with instead of around. The mailroom clerk got her glove, a procedure that signed liability to the correct shelf. The phrase, "We're working on it," learned a new trick, returning with proof. In a quarterly meeting where numbers usually stepped on truth, Richard projected Claire's one-page training instead of a pie chart and said, "We will be judged by the distance between our slogans and our doors." A few people shifted uncomfortably. A few clapped because they meant it. A few clapped because they knew how to be seen clapping. Culture changes one lunch at a time. They kept packing sandwiches. On a gray Thursday, Claire found Charles in the lobby, leaning lightly on his cane, watching the tide of suits. His coat looked warmer. His eyes looked less like a question and more like a story with its ending picked out, but not yet read aloud. "I wanted to see you," he said. "I have an appointment upstairs. But first I have a memory that won't leave me alone. I think it might be for you." They sat on a bench by the window, an indoor cousin of all the benches where the city keeps its memory. "When I was young," Charles said, "my father worked on the docks. He used to say, 'The rich own the boats, the poor tie the knots.' Every so often, everybody forgets the knots hold the boats. I spent 40 years pretending I owned a fleet that could sail without knots. Then one night in a pharmacy, someone tied one for me." He looked at her with the kind of gratitude that respects both directions. "I thought I was finished learning. Thank you for proving otherwise." Claire shook her head. "You gave me a door," she said. "You built a hall," he countered and smiled, a little winded by the strength of the sentence. "That's more than most men my age can do." That night, after Daniel fell asleep under a blanket with stars printed on it, Claire returned to the window and watched snow begin again. Half committed, shy. She opened the drawer with the envelope and took it out. Inside the weight, she found not money but a short letter in Charles's hand, shaky and sure. "In case anyone asks you to prove why you belong, hand them this until you can hand them your results." Taped to the bottom was a photograph. A screenshot from the pharmacy camera, grainy and holy, of her hand sliding $8 toward a counter while a tired man held his breath. She laughed, quiet, unbelieving, and set the picture on the shelf. It was not a trophy. It was a map. Weeks later, months perhaps, time learned to be elastic. Claire stood in a school auditorium where Daniel held a paper crown and tried not to grin it off his head. On a folding chair beside her sat Brianna. On the other side, Miles in his one good jacket. Behind them, Priya smelling lightly of copper and cleaner as if machines liked him back. Richard arrived late, slid into the row with the inelegance of tall men in small spaces, and held a program like a legal document. Charles did not come because winter had been a little unfair to him that week, but a scarf, better, softer, a logo stitched small, took his space, draped over the back of a chair like a flag. They watched children sing about mornings. They watched a boy whose mother had once measured milk at the bottom of a carton lift his voice as if the room had better acoustics than it usually did. They clapped like the sound could warm the building if the heat failed. Afterwards, in the crush of parents finding coats and teachers finding their breath, Daniel ran to Claire and said, "Mom, can my friends come over? We have bread." He said it like abundance were a toy you could share without breaking. She said yes because it was true. Later, when the apartment was loud with small feet and the quiet afterward returned like a blessing, Claire sat on the couch and thought about hinges. How little they ask and how much they do. She wrote one more line in the notebook. Kindness is not the door. It is the part that lets the door be used. And somewhere not far from there, on a bench in a park where a middle-aged narrator knew the names of the trees better than the names of most men, someone cleared his throat and finished the story for those who preferred to listen in the dark. Some stories don't begin with wealth, the narrator said softly. They begin with $8. Some don't end with castles, they end with a room where people answer phones and mean it. Claire didn't meet a prince. She met a policy and taught it how to have a pulse. A boy learned that promises can be kept after all. An old man learned he could start over without the shame of starting late. And a city so sure of its noise learned to hear itself breathe. He looked up. Snow kept its appointment with the lamp. If this story touched your heart tonight, don't let it end here. Come back. I'll be waiting, same bench, same park, with another story to share.